I didn't throw the wine glass. I didn't flip the table. I didn't even blink. When she said it, he was my soulmate. It landed like a knife wrapped in linen. She raised her glass to it. A toast. A goddamn toast. The laughter around the table hiccuped, froze, then fizzled into silence. Someone coughed. Someone else glanced at me, then away, as if looking directly at a man being gutted was somehow impolite. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Her eyes were warm with nostalgia. Not for me, not for us, but for a man who'd left her years ago with nothing but a playlist full of sad songs and a $700 therapy bill she never paid. She tapped the rim of her wine glass and smirked. I mean, obviously I love you, she said with a lazy hand wave in my direction. But you never forget your first real connection, right? My jaw tightened just enough to feel the click of bone. That was it. No raised voice. No passive-aggressive jab. No dramatic walkout. Just a quiet, steady shift. Something inside me rerouted itself in that moment, like a river snapping into a new course. I left enough cash to cover the meal plus a healthy tip, because the waitress didn't deserve the kind of emotional fallout that was radiating off her table like heat from an old war, and stood up. I'll get the car, I said. My tone was even. No tremor, no hint, just a little smile. Small, controlled, surgical. Her mouth open like she wanted to call me out, maybe make a joke of it, double down, pretend like I was overreacting, but something in my eyes must have stopped her, because she just nodded dumbly and returned to her wine. I walked past the restaurant's frosted glass wall into the parking lot and felt the chill of February bite at my collar. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just alert. I had felt something cold and final slide into place in that booth. Like watching a puzzle piece fall into the slot you always knew was missing, but had refused to admit existed. And now I couldn't unsee the picture it revealed. Here's what she didn't know. Her soulmate, that ex-boyfriend she just raised a toast to in front of half our mutual friends, wasn't just a ghost from her 20s. He wasn't just a name in an old phone or a scar on her memory. He was a man I'd quietly bailed out of financial ruin a few years before we even got married. She didn't know the full story because I never told her, because I never needed to. Back then, she had been crying over missed calls and emails he never returned. She had a rebound ring on her finger and pretended like it was just a phase. Meanwhile, he was calling me behind the scenes, trying to dig himself out of the mess he'd created with a different woman in another city. And I had the paperwork to prove it. But I never cashed in, never pressed, never needed to. Until now. As I slid into the driver's seat that night, I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just sat for a minute and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. Then I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small brown folder. The edges were soft from age, but the ink inside was as sharp as the day it had been printed. I flipped it open to the page I'd bookmarked. There it was. Clause 14C. In the event of default or failure to satisfy the repayment schedule, full collateral ownership, as detailed in Exhibit B, transfers to the cosigner. I had cosigned. He had defaulted. Exhibit B. It listed two things: a storage unit filled with old DJ equipment and a house. The house he still lived in. The house she used to dream about when things got tense between us. If it ever got bad, she once said, at least I'd have somewhere to go. She thought it was a romantic notion, a fallback plan, but she didn't know the deed had already signed her safety net into someone else's hands. Mine. I put the car in drive, pulled around front, and waited for her. She came out laughing with her friends, still playing hostess, still soaking in the moment. The woman I married had vanished somewhere between her third drink and that ridiculous toast. What stood before me now was a stranger, one with no idea that the ground beneath her had just started to shift. She slid into the passenger seat and buckled up, smiling as if nothing had happened. You were quiet tonight, she said. Just thinking, I replied. About what? I pulled onto the highway without answering, because I was already past the point of conversation. I was thinking about keys, about timing, about how fast a moving van could get to a certain address across town. And more than anything, I was thinking about the look on her face when she saw who would be stepping out. The living room echoed with their laughter long after the front door shut behind them. She'd invited them back for drinks, impromptu, she claimed. But I'd seen the text. The group chat was planned. She had even prepped a charcuterie board, for God's sake. There's nothing impromptu about smoked Gouda in perfect cubes. I sat in the corner chair, swirling a bourbon I didn't want, saying less than necessary. Her friends didn't ask if I was okay. Why would they? They thought I was sulking, that I'd just been momentarily out-halfed by some old flame she couldn't quite get over. To them, I was the stable guy, the dull one, the man who provided and shut up, reliable, uninteresting, emotionally invisible. And she fed that image like a starving thing. You know how he is, she giggled to her friend Ashley, who'd been half a breath away from an eye roll. He doesn't get nostalgia. He's never been much of a feelings guy. She said this without glancing at me, already turning her attention back to a Spotify playlist of early 2010s indie garbage, tracks they all used to sob to in college, I assume. I took one last sip and stood. You heading to bed? She asked casually, still scrolling through photos she and her friends had just taken. Posed smiles, tilted glasses, filters that softened everything but truth. Not yet, I said. I turned off the light in the hallway as I walked to my office. She probably assumed I was sulking or maybe going to play some late-night war game like I used to when we first got married. But she was wrong. The warmth between us hadn't cooled. It had vanished entirely. And unlike her, I didn't find comfort in nostalgia. I found opportunity in silence. The brown filing box under my desk hadn't been touched in over a year. I dusted it off with a dish towel, unlocked it with a key that had sat, unnoticed, on my keychain for a decade, and pulled out the documents. There were three: a collateral reassignment agreement, a property reassignment form, and a power of attorney, for him, not her. Her ex had signed it in desperation back in 2016, shaking hands and all, after blowing through what little dignity he had left on bad crypto and worse women. He needed $30,000 in cash, or he'd lose the house. I gave it to him, but not like a friend would. Like a man who reads the fine print aloud before he lets you hold the pen. He didn't even blink. Didn't ask why I wanted the paperwork so airtight. He just scribbled his name and walked away thinking he'd gamed a beta into a bailout. But that paperwork, those contingencies, were more than just legal traps. They were proof of how long I'd played the game silently, without ego, without anger. Just time. I opened my laptop, connected my secure drive, and double-checked the scanned versions. All there. Timestamped. Notarized. Digital signatures confirmed by Doka Verify. I uploaded everything into the secure server I paid extra to keep out of subpoena territory. Then I sent a scheduled message to my attorney. Initiate 14C. Include reassignment and default notification. Send to primary lender and local register. Simple. Boring. Sterile. That's how real consequences work. I could have made noise. I could have shouted at her in front of her smug little court of wine-drunk nostalgia junkies. I could have told her that every time she said soulmate, she was echoing the same man who once begged me to delay foreclosure for just another week. But I didn't. That would have been for her. This was for me. At midnight, I shut the laptop and returned to the bedroom. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. One arm slung across my side of the bed, her mouth slightly open, breathing like nothing in the world was wrong. I stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment. Not in sadness, not in longing, just in observation. Like studying a museum exhibit you've seen 100 times, but finally understand was fake all along. Then I walked over to my dresser, opened the third drawer, and slipped the keys to his house into my pocket. She thought the house was his. He thought the house was his. Hell, even the county records listed it under his name. But that would change very, very soon. I didn't climb into bed that night. I took the guest room. When she noticed in the morning, she'd assume we'd had a small fight. That it would pass, as it always had. That I'd sulk, then settle, then come back like I always did. But I was already gone. The rest of me just hadn't moved out yet. It was 2016, and I was still the guy who said yes too much. Back then, I was scraping my way through 60-hour weeks and burning weekends chasing freelance contracts just to keep our fridge full and the heating on. She was still figuring things out, which meant bouncing between hobbies that made no money and jobs that made her miserable. Her ex, meanwhile, had just gone through a scorched earth divorce that left him with nothing but a smug Instagram presence and a house hanging by a thread from foreclosure. I should have ignored the call. It came at 11:47 p.m., her name on my screen, but his voice on the other end. Hoarse, embarrassed, too polite by half. Hey man, it's weird, I know, but I didn't know who else to call. That's how he started. The irony? He was already living in that house. The one she would later call her backup. Her maybe someday. The one she'd once driven past during a fight and sighed. At least I know if everything fell apart, there'd be something. Yeah, that house. He'd missed 3 payments. The bank was about to start proceedings. I should have said no. Should have let the sharks finish their circle. But I had just finished helping her set up a photography blog she would abandon in 6 months, and something in me still wanted to be seen as good. Maybe even better. Maybe I thought that by helping the man who used to hurt her, I could somehow prove I was more than just the second act. So I said yes. We met at a diner 2 towns over. Neutral ground. He showed up late, still smelling like stale gin and failed plans. I brought a manila folder. He brought a pen. "I'll pay you back," he said without looking me in the eye. 6 months, tops. I nodded. That's fine. I had no intention of seeing that money again. The loan was structured as a bridge, interest-free, for him. What he didn't notice, or didn't care to ask about, was the clause near the bottom of the cosign document. Clause 14C. Default triggers full transfer of collateral. And Exhibit B? It named a few old assets, a storage unit with music gear, a failing website license. But buried just beneath those? The house. He signed without reading. Twice. And when I asked him if he wanted a copy, he waved it off. "It's just paperwork, right?" I nodded again. I never told her. Not because I was hiding it, but because I knew how she'd spin it. Back then, she still talked about him like someone who just made mistakes, not a man who would sell her a fantasy and then abandon it at the first sign of work. She would have accused me of holding something over him, of being manipulative, controlling. God forbid she realized someone could be smarter than the messes she romanticized. The payments never came. He missed the first, then the second, and by the third, he blocked my number. But I didn't chase. I didn't call. I just watched from a distance, content to let him play house in a home he no longer legally owned. Years passed. I moved up. Promotions. Investments. Stability. Meanwhile, she moved us into a condo she picked mostly because it had good lighting for her content, and I worked quietly in the background to make sure we never needed anyone again. Except she still did. She still kept in touch with him. Not constantly, but enough. Enough that I could feel it. A laugh that was too private. A look that wandered when a certain song came on. A lingering in old photo albums she claimed she kept for closure. I noticed it all, but I never mentioned it. Never accused. Never begged for attention. I knew what I had. More importantly, I knew what he didn't. And so the paperwork sat in my filing cabinet, untouched, and signed, unleveraged. Until she lifted that glass and said, he was my soulmate. She may as well have pressed a button. That night, after finalizing the transfer documents, I went into the safe and pulled the original file, yellowed slightly at the edges, but still pristine. There was even a receipt from the notary still folded inside. I laid it on the desk next to the new deed drafts. That house had a value then of $200,000. Now, north of $600,000. He had renovated it in parts. New patio, granite kitchen, some open concept nonsense. All of it built on a title that never truly belonged to him. And now it would never belong to her either. Because here's the truth. She didn't just humiliate me at that dinner. She reminded me who I had been when I signed that loan. A man they both underestimated. A man who kept his hands clean while other people scribbled away their futures with cheap pens and bad judgment. And when she said soulmate, she didn't realize she was toasting a man I had already replaced, on paper, in silence, years ago. She thought I didn't see the screen. That I couldn't read the way her shoulders tilted inward when she replied. The way her thumb paused ever so slightly before hitting send. Hovering, savoring, like she was stirring something she knew she shouldn't. But I saw it. I saw him. His name wasn't saved in full, of course. She was careless, not idiotic. It was something vague, just T, with a stupid sparkle emoji behind it. But the way her face changed when the notification popped up, God, that glow. That involuntary smirk, she didn't even bother to check in the mirror before walking past me. That was all the confirmation I needed. She sat on the other end of the couch with her legs tucked up like a teenager, wine glass resting on her thigh, texting furiously while pretending to watch whatever Netflix background noise was flickering across the screen. Some drama she insisted I'd really like if I just gave it a chance. The only drama I was interested in now was unfolding 3 feet away, and 10 years back. Every buzz from her phone was a heartbeat louder than the last. Every laugh she tried to hide was a nail in a coffin she couldn't see being built. I didn't ask, didn't make a scene, didn't reach for her phone like some jealous cliche from a bad sitcom. Instead, I stood up mid-episode, muttered, forgot to send a work file, and walked into my office. She didn't even look up, just waved me off, eyes locked on her screen. I sat down at my desk and exhaled slowly, once. Then I made the call. The bank rep picked up with the usual chipper monotone, rattling off their standard script. I gave my name, my client ID, and the file number. Their tone changed instantly. Yes, sir. The documents were last updated in 2019. Everything still looks valid. Would you like to proceed with notification? Yes, I said. Initiate default procedures. Flag the property for foreclosure prep. You'll find the signed collateral clause in Section 14C, and the updated valuation should qualify it for priority processing. A pause on the other end. Understood. We'll move it to active status and begin notification protocol by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Email me a confirmation copy. It's already on its way. Click. That was it. No theatrics. No demands. Just a single thread pulled, and the entire fabric would begin to unravel. By this point, her texting had slowed. Not because she'd caught on. No, she was probably just waiting for him to respond with some half-sentimental line like, "Remember that weekend in Tahoe?" Or, "I still think about your laugh." And she'd eat it up, of course. Pretend to feel guilty. Maybe even pause before replying. But we both knew she'd answer. She always answered him. I returned to the living room. She looked up. "That was quick," she said, giving me a smile too smooth to be real. "Didn't take much," I replied. She shifted slightly. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said, settling back into my chair. The irony was sour in my mouth. There I was, sitting in a house she'd picked, paying bills she never touched, watching her text a man who once cried in a parking lot because his water heater exploded and he couldn't afford the repair. She saw me as safe, predictable, the fallback. What she never realized was that I had spent years building my safety net too. Not one woven with nostalgia or drunken promises, but with paperwork, clauses, and leverage. At 2:17 a.m., I watched her leave the room, still cradling her phone, heading to the bathroom where she could type in peace. The door clicked shut behind her. Seconds later, I heard her giggle. Not once in 15 years had I heard that laugh from me. I turned back to my laptop and opened the confirmation email. Subject: foreclosure file initiated. Case hashtag F34992. Property address: redacted. Primary contact: holder, cosign default enforcement triggered. I clicked through the attachments. They were already preparing the formal default notice. Certified letter to go out in the morning. Once delivered, his 30-day clock would start ticking. And once he failed to respond, which he would, because he always did, the reassignment would go into motion. By then, the title would be mine. Not just in theory, not just buried in a dusty clause. Legally, irrevocably, silently. She thought her texting was harmless, that it existed in a vacuum of little sins. But every buzz was a match against dry kindling, and I had already poured the gasoline. She was humming. That's what struck me first, not the smell of the burnt toast she'd barely noticed, or the overflowing cup of coffee she set on the edge of the counter without thinking. It was the hum. Some pop melody she half remembered from a decade ago, soft and smug, like her dreams had gone exactly as planned. She wore one of my shirts, barefoot, her hair still messy from sleep. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was content. But I did know better. Because while she hummed and floated around our kitchen like some Pinterest wife fantasy, my inbox had just pinged with a time-stamped image. 8:03 a.m. The county clerk's seal embossed clean and cruel across the transfer document. The reassignment had been finalized. The property was officially flagged for transition. Notices were out. The first signs were already on the move, literally. That's when we both heard it. The unmistakable groan of tires over gravel. A diesel engine low and grinding. Then the beep. Slow. Backward. Deliberate. She froze mid-sip and turned toward the front window. I didn't move. Across the street, a box truck had just parked in front of her ex's house. Not a U-Haul. Not some ragtag Craigslist truck. This was professional, matte black, spotless, unbranded, like the kind used by high-end repossession services or corporate relocation teams who don't want attention, just results. She leaned toward the window, squinting past the blinds. "That's weird," she mumbled. I stayed quiet. She tugged the curtain back more, then pulled it sharply when one of the truck doors swung open. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, mirrored sunglasses catching the morning sun. Behind him, two more men followed, not in coveralls, but slacks and collared shirts. No boxes, no dollies, just a small silver case, probably holding lock tools or scanning equipment. They weren't movers. They were assessors. Her coffee cup hit the counter louder than it needed to. "Is he moving?" she asked, almost to herself. He didn't say anything. I waited a beat. "You talk to him often?" She flinched. "Just slightly." No, not like that. "We haven't. It's not what you think." I didn't say what I think. Her jaw tightened. She looked back out the window. Now the man with the clipboard was knocking on her ex's door. No hesitation. No waiting. Just 3 sharp raps. Efficient. Final. I imagined her ex inside, groggy, pulling on whatever passed for dignity at this hour, unaware that the walls around him were no longer his. She pulled out her phone. First one call. No answer. Second one. Straight to voicemail. By the third, she was pacing. What the hell? She tried texting. I could hear the taps. That frantic, uneven rhythm of someone already rehearsing excuses for a conversation that hasn't even started. Then the silence. Then her sigh, just slightly shaky. He's not picking up, she muttered. Maybe he's busy. I offered, sipping my own coffee. Her head turned, just a little too quick. Do you know something? I shrugged. I thought we weren't talking about him. She didn't answer, just turned back to the window as the door finally opened across the street. Her ex appeared, barefoot, shirtless, sleep-drunk, and confused. I saw it before she did, the look on his face. Not anger, not indignation. Fear. The kind of fear only a man who's just been told he doesn't own the ground he's standing on can feel. She didn't recognize it at first. Not fully, but she saw him step back. Saw the clipboard exchange. Saw the man in the suit point toward the corner of the porch, where a metal sign now stood. Notice of transfer of ownership. Pending foreclosure under Clause 14C. Her breath hitched. What is that? She whispered. I stood, brought my mug to the sink, and rinsed it out slowly. You okay? She didn't answer. Just stood there like the ground had moved beneath her. And for the first time in years, she didn't look like the one in control. Her brow furrowed, lips parting slightly, phone still in her hand but forgotten. I should go talk to him, she said suddenly. About what? I asked. She hesitated. The kind of pause that reveals more than any confession. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She just felt it. Something irreversible had shifted. Something that couldn't be laughed off, explained away, or hidden in a text thread. She looked back at the window, and for the first time since that dinner, I saw it. The crack. The jagged little fracture across the mask she wore so effortlessly. Unease. Real, sinking, skin-tight unease. And it was beautiful. She leaned closer to the glass, breath fogging the corner as she squinted through the slats. I watched from the hallway, just out of her sight line, letting her absorb it piece by piece. The truck door slid open with a low metallic grind, and she flinched. Her reflexes betrayed her. She expected boxes, packing tape, some bleary-eyed guy in basketball shorts dragging a couch out backwards. But what stepped out looked more like a corporate raid than a moving day. First came the man in the suit. Crisp navy, no tie, clipboard tucked under his arm. He moved with purpose, the kind of walk that didn't check for dogs or neighbors, just property lines and technicalities. He didn't glance around. He didn't smile. Just walked straight up to the porch like he belonged there. Behind him came two more, also suits, though less polished. One carried a hardshell case. The other, a small digital scanner and a bundle of forms already pre-filled. These weren't guys who needed instructions. They already knew the layout. She whispered, "What the hell?" And I could see her panic blooming. She tugged the curtain aside more forcefully, fingers tightening until her knuckles turned pale. She looked like someone watching a wreck unfold in slow motion, but unsure which car was hers. Her ex opened the front door with the sleep-slack face of someone still trying to make sense of reality. Hair sticking up like he'd just rolled off the couch, because, knowing him, he probably had. He wasn't dressed. Just mesh shorts, no shirt, and worse, no control. The man in the navy suit handed him a document. I didn't need to hear the words to know the cadence. By Clause 14C, per failure to satisfy debt obligations, you forfeited all claims. She gasped. She turned around fast, phone clutched like a lifeline. Something's wrong, she said. Really wrong. I figured, I said, stepping into view. He looks confused. You don't understand. That's, she couldn't finish it. I raised an eyebrow. Your soulmate. Her head whipped toward me, and for 1 second, there was no facade. Just pure panic. Then shame, trying to mask itself as indignation. Don't be like this. I'm not being anything. You're the one glued to the window. I'm just worried for him. Still, I said, dry as dust. After all this time? She didn't reply. Just turned back toward the glass as one of the suited men attached a neon orange sticker to the front door. Big letters, bold enough to be read from the street. She tilted her head, trying to decipher it. I already knew what it said. I had signed a request myself. Property under asset, transfer review. Entry subject to verified authorization. Contact holder of title for access. Holder of title. That's me. She started dialing again. His number. Straight to voicemail. She tried texting. hands shaking now. Why won't he answer? She muttered. Maybe he's busy getting evicted, I said casually. Her eyes snapped toward me again. What is this? I shrugged, walking to the fridge. Looks like someone forgot to read the fine print. You said you didn't keep in touch with him. I opened the fridge. I didn't. Then how? What is happening? I turned, leaned against the door, and took a slow sip of water. You remember when I said I'd co-signed something for him back in the day? She nodded slowly, warily. Well, I said, I never mentioned what the collateral was. Realization hit like a slap. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Just the faint tremor of someone who finally understands she's not just watching a disaster. She caused it. She turned back toward the window. Her ex was now sitting on the steps, head in his hands. The clipboard man pointed toward the street, clearly outlining his options, which were, to be fair, none. She spoke quietly. You wouldn't do this. I didn't. She looked at me. He did, I clarified. Back when he signed over the deed and assumed no one would ever collect. But why now? I stared at her. Dead center. No warmth. Because you raised a glass to him in front of 10 people. Called him your soulmate. Humiliated me for the sake of a story. She blinked. And in doing so, I said, you reminded me of the man I'd helped. The same man who burned you. The same man who now looks like he's figuring out how much Uber charges to store broken dreams. She turned away, visibly shaken, finally understanding what kind of game she'd walked into and how far behind she really was. The house she once whispered about during fights, the one she clung to in her mind as her escape route, was now off the board. Not because I fought her, but because I'd been planning checkmate since the first move. She finally got him on the 4th try. Her phone lit up mid-panic spiral, screen flashing T-sparkles like a cruel joke, and she snatched it like oxygen. She didn't even say hello, just a desperate, breathy, what is going on, before pacing to the kitchen window, clutching the phone with both hands like it might sprout answers. From across the room, I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Some guy in a suit. I don't know what he gave them. What did you sign? She paused, nodding as he babbled something about papers from years ago, and he never followed up, his voice rising like a man watching his last foothold slide off a cliff. Then, quieter, broken. They say the deed, it's already gone. I didn't know. He must have. He didn't finish the sentence. But he didn't have to. She did the math. Her hand dropped to her side. Phone still against her ear, but now silent. The line had gone dead. Or maybe he'd hung up, unable to face the man he once called a pushover and now couldn't even look in the eye. Her knuckles whitened around the edge of the counter, and she stood there for a second, staring at nothing. Then she turned to me. Her expression had shifted, no longer smug, no longer defensive, just trembling. A deer realizing too late it had wandered into a trap disguised as open meadow. I was at the stove, pouring fresh coffee, calm as a Sunday cartoon. You knew, she said softly. I didn't reply. You planned this. Still nothing. Say something. I took my time, topping off the second cup, steam curling gently as if the kitchen weren't drenched in a different kind of heat. Then I slid the mug across the table toward her, careful and smooth. The ceramic tapped softly against the wood, like a peace offering, like this was just another morning. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, frozen. Was this revenge? She asked finally. Is that what this is? I sipped from my own mug, eyes meeting hers. You really think I'd waste revenge on someone like him? I said. That hit harder than I expected. Her mouth opened, then shut. She looked down, shoulders folding in on themselves. For the first time, she looked small, like a woman realizing she wasn't in a spat. She was in a chess match that had been quietly unfolding for years, and she'd just now spotted the edge of the board. You never said anything, she whispered. I set my cup down gently. And what would I have said exactly? That the guy you kept emotionally tethered to for years signed his entire house to me in a haze of desperation while you were still defending his Spotify playlists. That was a long time ago. So was the signature. Funny how that works. She swallowed hard, glancing back out the window like it might offer a different outcome. But the truck was still there. The orange sticker still gleamed on the door. Her ex, her soulmate, was now pacing his own porch like a ghost trapped outside his body. Her voice cracked. I didn't think it meant anything. The toast. She nodded. It didn't mean anything to them, I said. It meant everything to me. Her lips trembled again, and for a second I saw the mask fall completely. Not sadness, fear. Not of me, but of the realization that I was never the fallback plan. I was the one keeping the lights on in both of their fantasies. The boring man with the good job, quiet temperament, and cold storage full of legally binding signatures. She sat down, finally, hands trembling, mug untouched. I didn't know, she muttered. That's the problem, I said. You never asked what I know. Silence. Long, pregnant. Her breathing uneven. She reached for the coffee with both hands like it might anchor her to something real. But I had already pulled the ground out from under both of them. And I hadn't even raised my voice. Dinner was lemon chicken. Overcooked. She used too much rosemary, again. And I could smell the nerves sweating out of her before I even walked into the room. The table was already set, 2 candles flickering like a peace treaty drawn in wax. She was wearing the dress I once said I liked. 4 years ago, in passing, on a Tuesday night, she barely remembered. She remembered now. Hey, she said with a strained smile, placing the casserole dish down like a prop in a play neither of us believed in anymore. Figured we could eat in tonight. Just, quiet. I nodded and sat down. Didn't touch the napkin. Didn't touch her wine. I wasn't there to perform. She poured herself a glass with a slightly trembling hand. I watched the red swirl, but said nothing. Let the silence stretch and shape the space like wet cement hardening into something permanent. She tried small talk first. How work was, if I'd seen the new building going up on 12th, if I'd noticed how early the leaves were changing this year. I gave her nothing but brief nods, one-syllable answers. Polite disinterest. A man digesting something much heavier than chicken. Halfway through, she finally cracked. You wouldn't do this, not to him. She didn't look up when she said it. Just kept slicing a cold carrot like she wasn't asking a question with the weight of 10 years behind it. I put my fork down and reached into my jacket pocket. She noticed the motion, froze, knife paused in the chicken. Then I slid it across the table. A plain white envelope. No flourish. No flourish needed. She stared at it. Didn't reach for it. Just blinked. Twice. What is it? She asked, already knowing. Read it, I said. She picked it up with the same fingers she'd once used to trace circles on my palm in bed. Now they were shaking. The envelope was already open. Inside, a single folded paper. Heavy, thick, clean. Her eyes scanned it. Once. Then again. The blood drained from her face like someone had flipped a switch. A lien transfer. Complete. Notarized. Executed. In my name. Dated the same day she toasted her soulmate, in front of a table full of people who had stopped looking at her and started watching me. She opened her mouth, but said nothing. Then her fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the plate with a shrill clang that echoed through the room like a dropped confession. She began, but no words followed. I leaned back. Still calm. Still quiet. I said. I almost let it go. She looked up. I kept that file buried for years. Never touched it. Never even thought about it. But that night, when you said what you said, I realized something. She was barely breathing. You weren't just holding on to him. You were building escape routes in your head. He was your fallback. Your if everything goes to hell, at least I still have, option. That's not fair, she whispered. No, I said, it's accurate. And you don't get to toast him in public and expect me to keep footing the bill for your imaginary exits. Tears welled, but I didn't flinch. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the idea of him. The man she thought would always be there in case I got too boring, too silent, too real. And now that man was sitting in a half-empty house across town with a legal notice taped to his door and a team of assessors photographing the kitchen he never paid for. You weaponized nostalgia, I said. I weaponized paperwork. The candle flickered between us. She reached for her wine like it might slow the collapse. But the truth had already eaten its way across the table. I stood, left my plate untouched, and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, the silence was louder than her sobs. Because she knew now, the story of her and him had ended a long time ago. She just didn't realize I was the one who wrote the final chapter. By the weekend, the van had become a myth. Not just a vehicle, the vehicle. Everyone was talking about it. Not openly, of course. Not to us. But the messages started trickling in. Group chats gone quiet. Friends suddenly busy. Social invites rescinded with paper-thin excuses. The gossip was spreading like ink in water, dark and fast, saturating every corner of our carefully curated social circle. And it wasn't about him. No one cared that her ex had been foreclosed on. He was always a little sketchy, a little chaotic. The kind of guy you tolerated at parties because he knew which tequila was overpriced and could name-drop indie bands no one liked out loud. His fall from grace didn't surprise anyone. What did surprise them was her connection to it. The timing. The coincidence. The toast. One of our mutual friends, Tasha, who always wore faux sympathy like designer perfume. Texted her 3 days after the van pulled away. Was that really his place? The one you mentioned at dinner? So crazy. So crazy. That phrase did more damage than a scream ever could. Because everyone remembered the dinner. Everyone remembered her lifting that glass, eyes dreamy and lips smirking, proclaiming her ex as her soulmate, while I sat there, composed, silent, forgotten. Everyone had laughed, uncomfortably, nervously, but none of them stopped her. They let it happen because drama is currency, and humiliation always makes better dinner theater than love. But now, the scene had a sequel. The same group that giggled at her boldness was now dissecting every detail like true crime podcasters. They remembered her tone, the way she leaned into the word soulmate, the way she dismissed me. He doesn't get this kind of thing. The implication that I was too dull, too present, too solid. And when the van showed up across town, followed by that orange foreclosure notice, they put the pieces together, wrongly, hilariously, beautifully. They assumed she had done it, that she'd orchestrated some messy drama to punish her ex, or impress him, or stage a comeback that backfired spectacularly. That her emotions got tangled with some financial nuke, and now her past had been publicly dismantled by her own hand. I didn't correct them. She tried, of course. Pulled a few aside during brunch the following Sunday. Told them, awkwardly, that she had no idea what happened, that it's just an old thing, that he messed up with a loan years ago. Her voice was brittle, her charm dulled, but they didn't believe her, because that version didn't match the story they wanted. They wanted the woman who played with fire and got burned. The one who humiliated her husband and then watched her ex lose everything days later in some poetic reckoning. And I gave them no reason to believe otherwise. When Ryan and Lila invited us to their housewarming, she RSVP'd for both of us. I showed up alone. Where's? Didn't feel up to it, I said. Then I offered to bring more ice in from the garage and didn't speak of it again. By the following Tuesday, she was out of every group chat except the one she created. Conversations started without her. Dinners were scheduled when she was busy. She tried to post a wine selfie with a vague caption, detoxing from toxic energy sparkles, and got 2 likes. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was social gravity. She'd spent years stacking her image on borrowed credibility, his charm, my stability, their attention. But when the first domino fell, they all remembered. The smug smiles, the dismissiveness, the glass lifted like a trophy. And they remembered my silence. Because while she talked, I acted. And in the end, people always respect the man who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. It was a Thursday, unseasonably warm. One of those strange mid-autumn days where the sun forgets it's supposed to be dying and shines just a little too hard, as if mocking the idea of endings. She thought I wouldn't be there. She thought the paperwork was theoretical, that maybe it hadn't gone through. That maybe, the van was a coincidence, the clipboard was unrelated, the whispers were exaggerated. That I'd scared him, perhaps, but not followed through. That I was bluffing. Because to her, I'd always been the man who didn't push back. The man who let things go. The man who gave grace so often she mistook it for impotence. But when she turned the corner and saw the street lined with tidy sedans, not a single one older than 5 years, all legally parked and marked with assessor tags, her grip on that delusion began to crack. She parked badly, crooked, slammed the door with a bit too much force. She was in jeans and a half-buttoned cardigan, probably thrown on in a panic. Her sunglasses sat awkwardly on her face, meant to look casual, but they couldn't hide the way her jaw tightened. The house stood there, freshly quiet. No music, no noise, no movement from inside. Then I stepped out. Not him. Me. I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. I was holding keys. Not a clipboard. Not a file. Keys. The brass glinted in the sun as I turned them slowly in my palm, letting them catch the light just so. Unintentional to the casual eye, deliberate to the one who'd shared a bed with me for 13 years. Behind me, the lead assessor gave a nod and ducked back into the entryway. Another one was measuring the porch dimensions, a laser tool flashing against the trim. Standard procedure for a condition report. She stopped walking, dead in the middle of the curb, like someone who'd taken a step too far off the diving board and finally looked down. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. Not my name. Not a plea. Not even a protest. Just air. I took one slow step toward her, keys still in hand, eyes steady. And then I did the one thing she could never prepare for. I smiled. Not cruel. Not smug. Just done. She dropped her purse. I watched her fingers twitch like she might crouch down to grab it, but instead they hovered midair, uncertain. The way her eyes darted between me and the door behind me. It was like watching someone realize they'd walked back into a house that wasn't there anymore. Ghosts in place of furniture. Shame where there used to be exit plans. She whispered something. I couldn't hear it. Probably not meant for me anyway. It didn't matter. She had come here expecting to see a disaster she could fix. Maybe even console. A man broken, grateful, needing her. Instead, she saw the man she discarded standing on the front steps of her past, holding the deed to the future she assumed she'd always have waiting in her back pocket. And that back pocket? Empty. We stood like that for a long moment. The assessors ignored us, true professionals. They'd seen worse, probably. Hell, they'd probably seen better. But none of that mattered to me. Because in that silence, with that warm breeze rustling the leaves and her sunglasses slipping just slightly down the bridge of her nose, something clicked between us. She finally saw me. Not as the man she kept on standby. Not as the quiet husband she could embarrass and then dismiss. But as the man who'd waited, planned, executed, and never once raised his voice. She took a step back. I nodded once. And then I turned, stepped inside, and closed the door gently behind me. Not a slam. Not a statement. Just a final, quiet end to a chapter she thought she authored. The lock clicked into place. And outside, she stood still, frozen. Because everything she thought she could run back to had just turned and looked her in the eye. And told her, without saying a word, that it no longer wanted her.